We are going to cut the F and FR pieces from the dark blue fabric, and we are going to have to cut 160 of these. So we are going to cut 27 2-inch wide braider strips. These strips are measured using the Braider Ruler, so we are going to take the braider and we're going to set the braider at strip square measurement, which are the measurements coming down here, and we're going to set that at 2. Just tipping the ruler upside down, we are now going to use that to set our adjustable ruler. So by putting the black to clear and black to clear underneath, we can set our adjustable ruler to measure the 2-inch portion on the braid ruler. If you have the Braider Ruler, these measurements on the Braider Ruler include seam allowance and are different from your standard inch measurements. So you can set this ruler to the 2-inch and you can cut your braid strips using the Braider Ruler. We're going to cut 27 strips from the fabric. Put your guide over the rough edge of the fabric, and we are going to align one of the lines or the edge of the fabric ruler with the fabric and cut our strips. This way we can straighten the edge of the fabric without having to move our 2-metre piece of fabric. Now we just put the guide to the edge and we will just go down the fabric cutting until we have 27 strips. To cut the F and FR braid pieces, we are going to use the Braider Ruler. We are going to set it on 8 using the A measurement across the top, and we are going to line the guide up in line with the 8 here. I'm using rotating mat, and I'm going to now need to straighten off one end, which is the end with our selvage, and I will hold the guide down and cut the ends off. You can either use the Braider Ruler to cut your ends straight, or you can use your straight ruler to cut the ends. Now turning the mat, I'm going to put the braider edge against where we just cut, and I've got to make sure that my ruler aligns at the base with the fabric. We are going to use these points that have been trimmed off to align when we sew up. So we know that we are cutting our braid correctly when we trim off the points here. And we will cut our 27 strips. We need 160 of the F and FR pieces. It's 80 of each, and each cut we are making is giving us the F and FR reverse pieces. With the pieces that we have left, we can open these pieces up and we will cut our braid pieces from here, and this way we get 6 of our 8-inch braid from the width strip of fabric. Again, we will straighten off the ends. And cut the braid. From the fabric we have left over, we can cut our D 1-inch squares. We need 160 of those, and we will get 108 if we use this fabric. So we have our Braider Ruler set at 1 inch, and we are going to cut them into strips. Then we are going to cross cut them into 1-inch squares. From each piece we'll get 4, which will give us a good head start on that 160 1-inch squares that we require. For the E and ER braid pieces, we need to cut 2-inch wide braid strips again, and we also need to cut our braid set at 6. So again we set that. I've got my pieces laid out and I'm going to trim off the edges. Now that we've straightened the edges, we can use the braid again to cut our 6-inch braid. We will get 8 pieces of braid from each of these strips, and as we need 32, we only need 4 strips of fabric. If we have our strips aligned on our mat coming down here, we can put one of our braid on top, and that way we know if we cut all those pieces just a little bit larger than that, using our ruler to straighten that edge, that we will get the piece out of it. We will also have this piece left, which will give us another 4 of our 1-inch D pieces. For the D 1-inch squares, we have been able to cut 124 of them from our pieces left over from cutting the braid. So now we only need to cut another 36, and we will get those from 2 1-inch strips. So I've cut the 1-inch strips, and I'm just going to cross cut those into 1-inch squares. With the blue fabric, I have cut a 90-inch piece of fabric from my length, and I have folded it in half and in half again. So I now have 8 layers of fabric to cut. This is what I'm going to cut the sashing from. I'm going to trim off the edge to have a straight edge here. I have turned the fabric round, and I have the straight edge that we straightened on the left hand side. I'm going to cut sashing strips, and I'm going to cut the sashing strips at 2.5 inches using our standard adjustable ruler, which is standard inches, which means I have set it at 2.5, which gives me a 1/4 inch seam allowance on both sides, which will give me a finished sashing of 2 inches. My ruler is not the length of the fabric, so what I'm going to do is cut, stop, leave my blade in place, and just move my ruler up with the fabric guide touching the edge of the fabric and continue cutting. I will cut 5 strips like this, and we are cutting 8 layers, so that will give me 10 strips of sashing, which is what we require for the quilt. Once we've cut our 5 sashing strips, we need to cut those to 88.5 inches in length. We're going to open up this piece, so we have one fold here. We need to cut 44.25 inches from here to the end. And to do that, we can use a ruler and mark and measure and mark and measure, and the accuracy is not there. Or we can use our border control ruler. Border control is a 60-inch long ruler. The end has a mitre on it, and with that we can do mitered borders. We're not going to use that today, so we'll leave it folded in. So we just take our ruler, put it over our fabric. This end is our fold, and that's the end we're going to line up. We need to line up the 88.5 inch mark here, which shows you at the top is 44¼ inches as well. Making sure that your piece is nice and straight against the edge and smooth. We are then going to come up to this end, just run our rotary cutter up, and it's that easy to cut an 88½ inch length of fabric. For the top and the bottom border, we're going to cut another 2½ inch strip, and from that we are going to cut 82½ inch pieces to go across the top and the bottom, and we will use the border control again to do that. So we've opened the fabric out again, line up the 82½ inch mark, and we'll come up to the top end and cut, and that will give our top and bottom borders. With the remaining piece of fabric from our 90-inch piece, we're going to fold it in half again, back to 8 layers. I'm just doing this so I can trim off this edge to just make it so I've got 4 layers of fabric again when I separate those. We need 160 G and GR braid. We will get 3 strips cut across this fabric. From each of those strips we will get 8 by 2 inch braids. That will give us 24 of our braid pieces from each of these pieces, which is 48. Using the remaining fabric, we will cut the rest of our G and GR pieces. We need another 112 pieces, which is 19 strips, and we'll get 6 braids from each of those. We now need to cut our quarter square triangles from our blue fabric, which is our eye piece. We need to cut 96 of these. We will set our quarter square triangle, which is our standard Westalee quarter square triangle, at 4, and we'll use the triangle to adjust our ruler to cut the strips. We'll cut our strips, and we will cut 8 strips of fabric for these triangles. Using your rotating mat again, cut out the triangles. Just missing our selvages, lining up the ruler at the base. Cut our first set of 4 triangles. We can now bring the guide to the edge again. Cut the next 4 triangles, and we will get 4 more triangles from the piece that is remaining, and that will give us 12 triangles per strip. From the white, we need to cut 192 braid pieces, 2 inch by 6 inch, and we will need to cut 24 2-inch braid strips for these. From each strip we will get 8 braid pieces. With the braid set at 6 using the A measurement, we are going to straighten off the edges first. Then we're going to cut our braid from that. We will get 2 braids across, which will give us 8 braids from each of these strips. Turn that around using one of the braids from before as our guide. I'm just going to straighten up the edge. Once I've done that, I can cut the braid. And for this piece we need to cut 82-inch squares, we will get two 2-inch squares from the end of that piece of braid. Run a straightening line here, spin the mat, and cut a 2-inch square from there. We've cut 40 of our C 2-inch squares, so we need to cut 3 more 2-inch strips. Cross-cutting those, we will get another 20 squares per strip, so that will give us the 60 that we need to finish, with a couple of spares left over. To cut the white A 1-inch braider squares, we again set our braider ruler to 1, and we will get 32 braider squares from each strip. So we only need to cut 5 strips of fabric to get our 160 braider squares. So we'll cut 5 strips of fabric, and then, as we have in the past, we will just cross cut those into 1-inch squares.